I had finished the 6th grade. I had been a happily unemployed youngster. Now, I had chores around the house. I think Dad woke up early in the morning thinking of things for his kids to do during the day. But I didn't have a job per se. And sometime in the summer, my dad said to me, "How would you like to start mowing people's yards?" He said, "I will get a lawnmower for you, and you can pay me back. When you get money for a yard, you pay me half until the lawnmower's paid for, and you keep the other half." I don't know whether I said no. I doubt that I did. He suggested it. And so I got into the lawn mowing business. I don't know how many hours and how many miles my dad drove taking me to mow people's yards around the towns where we lived. This happened in Idabel, happened later in Tahlequah. In fact, I suppose that probably the last lawn that I mowed for money would have been in my first, maybe second year of college. But lots of lawn mowing over the years. Now, didn't have a fancy riding mower, didn't even have self-propelled. That first lawnmower I think cost $45, but it started and it cut grass. But there were some things I discovered pretty early in my lawn mowing career. Out in those yards, there would be stickers. There would be the occasional branch that if you didn't watch would slap you in the face. There were wasps. There were the wasp nest in the bushes. And then in a yard in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, I discovered that there were wasp nests in the ground. My brother and I both did. Because we went across it, we disturbed them, and the next time around, they got both of us up the pants legs. And then, of course, and this is not so much a problem today when you're mowing the yard, but it was then. There was the dreaded clothesline that you didn't see until you were upon it. Sometimes, when you're going along, whether it's lawn mowing, whether it's hiking, whether it's in just an unfamiliar area where you're walking along, you encounter things that will do you harm. You have to watch out for what's there. Certainly in ancient times, as people went from place to place, often there was not a path or a road. And they would encounter the tree branches. They would encounter thorns on certain bushes. And God, in His Word, used these as a warning to Israel. Numbers chapter 33, verses 50 through 56 is our main text this evening. On the plains of Moab, by the Jordan across from Jericho, the Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you cross the Jordan into Canaan, drive out all the inhabitants of the land before you. Destroy all their carved images and their cast idols, and demolish all their high places. Take possession of the land and settle in it, for I have given you the land to possess. Distribute the land by lot according to your clans. To a larger group give a larger inheritance, to a smaller group a smaller one. Whatever falls to them by lot will be theirs. Distribute it according to your ancestral tribes. But if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land, those you allow to remain will become barbs in your eyes and thorns in your sides. They will give you trouble in the land where you will live, and then I will do to you what I plan to do to them." Israel had been promised the land of Canaan. Soon after their delivery from Egypt, they came to the edge of the promised land, but that is as far as they got. As we saw in an earlier lesson, The spies went into the land, the 12 spies. 10 of them came back with a negative report. Only Joshua and Caleb said, yes, we can take the land, the Lord is with us. And because of the lack of faith, those who had left Egypt were not allowed to enter the promised land. They would wander in the wilderness for 40 years. And so the time comes, after the 40 years, that now, once again, Israel is ready to enter the promised land. Warning is given to them again. They are told the procedure when they get there. They are to drive out all of the inhabitants of the land. Now, do we need to feel sorry for the Canaanites? Not at all. These were idolatrous people. They offered children in sacrifice to their false gods. They were an evil people. They were going to be driven out of the land. That was God's plan. And Israel would enter into this land, the land flowing with milk and honey. The instruction is very specific. Destroy all their carved images. They had made idols, carved idols. Those were to be destroyed. Destroy their cast idols. Some of them had been made by basically melting precious metal and putting it over a figure to make the idol. Demolish all their high places. There were monuments and basically places of worship, the altars. Often these were built on high places. These are to be destroyed. Then they are to take possession of the land and settle in it. For I have given you the land to possess. This was God's blessing to Israel, the land that he was giving them. They would distribute the land by lot. The larger groups would get more land, the smaller groups less land. It would be distributed according to their tribes. And then in verse 55 there is this warning. If you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land, those you allow to remain will become barbs in your eyes and thorns in your sides. I can relate to that statement because of my experience in lawn mowing all those years. The King James translation says pricks in your eyes. That's not a word I use on a regular basis, but it's carrying the same idea as a barb, something sharp. I'm kind of grateful these days that I need to wear glasses all the time because that actually probably gives some safety when I'm mowing the yard. You don't want something getting in your eye. It can be just a little thing, but it can do, certainly, it can be uncomfortable. It can even do damage. It can destroy sight. A thorn in the side. In any part of the body, a thorn would hurt. If you don't remove the Canaanites completely, God says, they will give you trouble in the land where you will live. And furthermore, the word of the Lord is, then I will do to you what I plan to do to them. If you don't drive out the Canaanites completely, you're going to regret it. Now, this is not the first time that Israel had heard this instruction about the Canaanites. Exodus chapter 23, verse 33, do not let them live in your land, or they will cause you to sin against me, because the worship of their gods will certainly be a snare to you. Not getting rid of the Canaanites, not getting rid of their idol worship, will be a bad influence for you, a snare, a trap for you. In Joshua chapter 23, verses 9 through 13, we read this. The Lord has driven out before you great and powerful nations. To this day, no one has been able to withstand you. One of you routs 1,000, because the Lord your God fights for you, just as he promised. So be very careful to love the Lord your God. But if you turn away and ally yourselves with the survivors of these nations that remain among you, and if you intermarry with them and associate with them, then you may be sure that the Lord your God will no longer drive out these nations before you. Instead, they will become snares and traps for you, whips on your backs and thorns in your eyes, until you perish from this good land, which the Lord your God has given you. God has given you the land. The instruction was, drive out the inhabitants. If you don't, if you in fact intermarry with the people of that land, it is going to be a great calamity for you. We have again the language, snares, traps, whips on your backs, thorns in your side. And in fact, they will perish from the good land which God had given to them. Timothy Ashley commented on our passage in Numbers. If the Israelites fail to drive out the Canaanites and eradicate their religious observances and cultic sites from the land, then those Canaanites who are allowed to remain will be as splinters in their eyes and thorns in the side of Israel. As the splinter or thorn is small but sharp and can cause more than discomfort, including infection and in the eyes blindness, so even a small remnant of Canaanites will cause great problems in Israel's future. It therefore will be foolish to allow the Canaanites to remain in the land. Coy Roper wrote, God was warning that they would influence the Israelites to adopt their abominable practices. The result would then be that God would do to Israel what he had planned to do to the Canaanites. Just as God planned for Israel to drive out these pagans out of the land, he would drive Israel out of the land that he had given them if they disobeyed him. Woods and Rogers in their commentary say, the Lord steadfastly warned that if the people did not drive out the inhabitants, the remaining Canaanites would become barbs and thorns. Left in the land, the Canaanites would become a constant irritation as well as a snare, entrapping the nation in compromise and idolatry. After the conquest, the aged Joshua similarly warned against the pernicious influence of those Canaanites who yet remained in the land. Such clear warnings that if Israel led astray would be likewise driven from the land in just retribution was later tragically realized in the Babylonian exile. Well, Israel could not claim that they had not been warned. It was very clear. I'm going to give you the land. When you go into the land, you make sure that you drive out every resident of the land. Don't intermarry with them. Don't associate with them. Drive them out. We get over to the book of Judges, chapter 1, verse 27. But Manasseh did not drive out the people of Beth-shan, or Tanakh, or Dor, or Iblim, or Megiddo, and their surrounding settlements. For the Canaanites were determined to live in that land. The Canaanites resisted. Israel failed to completely do what God had said. Now, when Israel became strong, we read in Judges, they did press the Canaanites into forced labor, but they never drove them out completely. The same was true of some of the other tribes. When we get down to Judges chapter 2, verses 1 through 3, here is what is said. The angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochim and said, I brought you up out of Egypt and led you into the land that I swore to give your forefathers. I said, I will never break my covenant with you, and you shall not make a covenant with the people of this land. But you shall break down their altars, yet you have disobeyed me. Why have you done this? Now therefore I tell you that I will not drive them out before you. They will be thorns in your sides, and their gods will be a snare to you. Israel did not follow the command of God. God had made a covenant with them. God kept his part of the bargain. God is always faithful. But Israel did not keep their side of the covenant. They disobeyed. They did not drive out the Canaanites. And so, this would be a snare to them. Israel, time and time again, would go into idolatry. Now God would warn them. He would punish them. He would bring them back. They would again go into idolatry. And finally, enough was enough. And Israel, and later Judah, would be punished. There would be the 70 long years of captivity in Babylon. To us, God gives a warning. The Apostle Paul says we learn from those Old Testament scriptures. What happened to Israel can happen to any group of people. It can happen to the church. It can happen to individuals. We live in a nation that we once called a Christian nation. I no longer call it that. I have seen a shift in my lifetime. It used to be that Christian values were valued. They are now persecuted. We live in a nation where abortion is defended. Pornography has increased. All kinds of immorality have increased. They're approved of by many. What can we do as a society? We can fight against these things. But we have to remember that the church began in a very immoral world. The 21st century church is much like the first century church, that we are surrounded by those opposed to the values of Christianity. In our families, we must avoid those influences that would become snares to us, that would be the splinters or the pricks in our eyes. And of course, as individuals, we must do this. Heard a saying a long time ago, boats have to be in the water, but it's very important that the water not get in the boat. As long as the boat's in the water, it will float. If the water starts getting in the boat, you can have a tragedy. You can sink. As Christians, we live in the world, but we must make sure that the world does not get into us. We are surrounded by so many evil influences. There are so many splinters, stickers, snares, spiritual clotheslines. So many things that can come between us and God. We have to be very careful not to toy with evil. Israel may have thought, different ones, well, you know, it's just going to be too hard to drive all of these Canaanites out of here. They may have even thought they had an advantage when they had a few remaining and they put them into forced labor. They can do all these dirty jobs we don't want to do. But they intermarried. They worshiped the gods of those they married. They accepted the idols, whether they married the people or not. They got into idolatry over and over. And so, of course, the word of the Lord is true. And the prediction became very true. Let us watch out for the thorns, the splinters, whatever we want to call them. Those things that would come between us and God. Let us not let those things destroy us spiritually.